I had baked the pie that morning, just like I used to when Merritt was little. Apple cinnamon, her favorite. I even wrapped it in that checkered cloth she'd embroidered in 8th grade, the one with crooked blue stitches spelling home. Maybe I knew something felt off. Why else would I rehearse in the car how I'd say hello? Why else would my hands tremble as I climbed the porch steps of the house I helped them buy? I knocked twice, then waited. It was Wade who opened the door, not Merritt. He filled the frame like a gate, his crisp polo shirt stretched too tight across his chest, that smug, polished smile already forming. But it didn't reach his eyes. "Lorena," he said flatly. "Hi, Wade," I replied. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by. I made a pie." He didn't even glance at it. "This isn't a good time," he said, fingers tightening on the door. "Actually, it's not going to be a good time." I blinked, confused. "Oh, should I come back later?" He exhaled sharply, like I'd said something offensive. "No, you shouldn't come back at all." My throat closed. "Excuse me." His voice lowered. "Merritt and I talked. We think it's best if you don't come around anymore. You cause tension and honestly, it's draining." Merritt said that she agrees. He said it quickly. Too quickly. I heard something barely audible from inside. A sniff, the scrape of a chair, maybe a breath that sounded too much like a sob. My hand tightened around the pie tin, the cloth bunching in my fist. Can I at least say goodbye?" "She doesn't want to see you upset," he said. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Then the door shut. Not slammed, just shut. But the sound reverberated through me as if it had been bolted. I stood there for a moment, maybe two. Then I placed the pie gently on the welcome mat and walked back to my car. I didn't cry, not yet. I drove in silence all the way home, replaying the moment again and again. And by the time I unlocked my own front door, I already knew I hadn't lost my daughter. I was going to have to take her back. There's something about being underestimated that gives you more power than any title ever could. After Wade shut that door in my face, I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and stared out at the trees swaying beyond the glass. I wasn't mourning, I was calculating. And that old part of me, the one that used to review military-grade procurement budgets and cut through red tape with a pen stroke, began to stir. Stone Pine Defense Logistics still sent quarterly shareholder packets to my P.O. box. They arrived in plain, brown envelopes, always with a little note at the bottom, thanking Mrs. L. Gresham for her continued legacy stewardship. Most assumed I was a ceremonial name. Let them. I never needed the spotlight. It was more useful to operate from the shade. After my husband Ellis passed in 2011, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I kept his shares. Not just kept consolidated. Through old trusts and retirement portfolios, I quietly bought out 2 smaller shareholders. By 2014, I owned 61% of Stone Pine. I didn't sit on press panels. I didn't show up to ribbon cuttings. I didn't need to. Wade came on board in 2018, fresh-faced and overconfident. I remember his file. Russ brought it to me in a red folder. He's got connections, knows how to play the game, Russ had said. I skimmed the resume and approved the hire with one condition: keep me invisible. Wade never knew whose signature guaranteed his salary, his company car, his year-end bonuses, and that's how I liked it. I've never been interested in being anyone's trophy matriarch. Let them think I'm just the woman who sends sugar cookies at Christmas. Ellis used to say, "Silence is strength. Let them think you vanished." But I hadn't vanished. I'd been watching, waiting. Now Wade had made a mistake. He'd pushed my daughter behind a wall and thought I'd accept it, thought I'd go quietly. But the truth is, I was never just a widow. I was the woman who built half that company alongside her husband. And it was time I started acting like it. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing with loss. It's not always a sudden break. Sometimes it's erosion. At first it was little things. Merritt canceling Sunday dinners. A missed birthday call that came the next morning with a rushed apology and a muffled voice. I told myself she was busy. She had a new job, a marriage to build. Life got in the way. That's what I said out loud. But inside, something quieter was already tugging at me. Then came the holidays. The year before last, she said they were visiting Wade's parents in Santa Fe for Christmas. I sent gifts. She sent back a thank you email. No call, no video chat. Last Thanksgiving, she said they wanted to do something low-key, just the two of us. I roasted a turkey anyway, just in case. I ended up freezing most of it. The tone of her voice changed too. Before Wade, her voice danced. When she spoke to me, full of curiosity, of warmth. But over time, it grew filtered, carefully measured, even rehearsed. I'd ask how she was doing and get fine. Everything's fine. And always that glance toward something I couldn't see, like she was checking if someone was listening. There was one night last year that should have told me everything. I'd called to ask if she'd like to visit the cabin Ellis and I used to take her to in the summers. She hesitated. I think Wade's allergic to cedar, she said. I remember staring at the phone heart, thudding in silence. Not let me ask him. Not we'll make it work. Just a flat dismissal. No room. No space. Like a door, quietly locked from the other side. I had convinced myself that maybe she was just growing up, finding her own rhythm. But looking back now, it wasn't her rhythm I was hearing. It was his. She hadn't drifted. She'd been steered. And I was finally ready to see who was holding the wheel. Russ didn't ask questions. When I called, just said, "Come by the office after 6. That's the thing about men who've known you through wars and funerals. They recognize the tone before the words. I brought 2 things to that meeting, a bottle of rye and a list of dates Wade had canceled family visits on Merritt's behalf. Russ brought spreadsheets. I didn't touch the rye. He's slick, Russ muttered, thumbing through the printouts. Never oversteps too far in one place. But when you zoom out, he's been eating well on your dime. There were receipts for client dinners that matched with quiet nights Merritt claimed they were staying in. A 3-day networking conference in Boston where no industry event had taken place. Travel vouchers with hotel upgrades, wine bars, spa charges. He was clever about the coding listing, half under developmental relations, the other half buried inside a fake vendor expense. Any of this authorized, Russ asked. None, I said. And that vendor Midwell group checked the name against our suppliers. It's fake, a shell. Russ nodded, expression tightening. He thinks he's playing house on your payroll. I closed the folder slowly, the weight of it heavier than the paper inside. That night, I poured myself a glass of the rye and opened Merritt's old texts. I scrolled back through birthdays, anniversaries, canceled plans. Her language was so curated. No warmth, just efficiency. One message stood out, dated 6 months ago. Sorry, Mom. We're trying to keep things balanced. Wade's been overwhelmed lately and needs space to decompress. He needs space. The Merritt I raised used to light up at the word home. Now she was shrinking in real time, and I'd missed the signs. She wasn't just pulling away from me, she was pulling inward, folding herself into smaller shapes to keep from upsetting a man who smiled too easily and held everything too tightly. The numbers on those reports were bad enough, but the emotional math was worse. And if Wade was using my money to trap my daughter in a cage she couldn't see, then I wasn't just going to shut him down. I was going to take apart the hinges. The boardroom hadn't changed in years. Still cold, still quiet, still anchored by that long, dark walnut table Ellis insisted on having shipped in from Vermont. I ran my hand across its edge as I entered, letting the weight of memory settle in before anyone noticed me. Russ stood when I walked in. "Gentlemen," he said, voice casual. Mrs. Gresham wanted to sit in today. A bit of nostalgia. I gave a small, polite wave. "Don't mind me. Just wanted to see what you've all built these last few years." My voice was sugar-warm, harmless. I even wore the brooch Merritt had made in college to complete the illusion. Wade didn't hide his surprise. He stood too, then smiled like a politician, perfectly neutral, carefully respectful. "Mrs. Gresham, what an honor. Please take my seat." He didn't know I already owned the chair he offered me. The meeting opened with routine figures, quarterlies, vendor notes, the usual fluff. Then Wade cleared his throat and launched into his segment like a man auditioning for CEO. "Stonepine's got momentum," he declared, clicking through slides. "Our client retention is up 18%, and I've initiated early talks with Lasker Aerospace. They're hungry for a logistics revamp." He peppered his language with phrases like strategic synergy and aggressive growth positioning, words that meant nothing and everything. I watched him carefully. He was good, charismatic, confident, polished, just polished enough to convince a room full of men that he belonged at the helm. "Impressive," I murmured. "And the bonuses you've been awarded for all this initiative. Who signs off on those again?" He barely looked up. "Oh, the board does. Standard executive package." A shrug. A smirk. "Oversights handled through finance. I don't bother with the specifics." "No," I said gently. "Of course not. Why would you?" I sipped the coffee Russ had handed me earlier, eyes fixed on Wade. He couldn't tell that each number on his screen had been traced, each contract reviewed. He was speaking to the ghost in the walls. Only I wasn't a ghost. Not anymore. I was flesh and blood, and I had just entered the room. 2 days after the board meeting, I called Wade from my garden, where I'd once taught Merritt the difference between lavender and rosemary. The call was brief, warm, almost maternal. "You know, I said you handled yourself beautifully at that presentation. Ellis would have been impressed. I think you're ready for real leadership." He paused, then chuckled modestly. "Well, thank you, Mrs. Gresham. That means a lot. I'd like to consider you for an expanded role," I continued. "Something closer to succession planning. Why don't you send me a list, key client supplier contacts, ongoing deals, just so I can understand the web you've built, see how everything connects." He agreed immediately, eager, greedy. He had no idea he'd just handed me the rope. The file arrived that evening, a spreadsheet, clean columns, sharp formatting, but the contents were rot. The client list read like a blueprint for mutiny. Every major partner Stonepine held long-term contracts with was marked with coded notes, like prime for pivot, receptive to side proposal, or worse, already in talks. Then came the suppliers. 2 were real. The rest, ghost companies. Entities with paper trails that looped back into Wade's own pocket. He hadn't even tried to hide them well. Just swapped out initials, changed zip codes. I knew every trick. Ellis and I had seen men try this before, but never this close to home. And then I saw it, a third tab. Personal barriers, internal distractions. My stomach clenched before I clicked. At the top of the list, Lorena Gresham, next to my name, manage perception, old-fashioned, emotionally reactive. Phase out slowly, limit contact with Merritt, encourage independence narrative. I read it twice. He hadn't just been climbing. He was building a ladder with my name nailed to the bottom rung, quietly removing me from Merritt's life one excuse at a time, while constructing a future he thought he'd control completely. And now, with this list in hand, I knew exactly where to start dismantling it. I set the table for 3, just like I used to, on Friday nights, when Merritt was in high school. Cloth napkins, polished forks, her favorite roasted chicken with thyme and lemon. The house smelled like memory. I lit candles not for ambiance, but for steadiness. I needed to be calm. Wade arrived exactly on time, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the same strained smile he'd perfected in boardrooms. Merritt followed behind him like a shadow, shoulders tucked in, voice barely above a whisper when she hugged me. Dinner was polite. I asked about her classes, nodded through Wade's monologue about emerging markets and how leadership is mostly about vision. He didn't notice that Merritt barely ate, or that I watched her more than I listened to him. Halfway through dessert, Wade stepped outside to take a call, something about vendors and time zones. I let the silence settle before I spoke. "Do you feel smaller around him?" I asked, not unkindly, just honestly. Merritt blinked. Once. Twice. She didn't answer. She looked down at her plate instead, pushing a raspberry around the rim with her fork. "He says you guilt-trip me," she whispered, after a long pause. "That you're always trying to control me." I didn't flinch. I nodded as if she were describing someone else. Let the words sit between us. And do you believe that she didn't answer? But the question stayed in the air, like the steam off her untouched tea. Wade came back in, jovial and loud. The mood snapped. She straightened her back, smiled tightly, and started clearing dishes as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. He kissed her temple and told me dinner was divine. I nodded and thanked them for coming. They left soon after. Merritt hugged me longer than she needed to. Her fingers pressed into my shoulder like she was trying to say something she didn't yet have language for. After they pulled away, I stood at the window until their car disappeared into the dark. The spell hadn't broken cleanly, but there was a crack now, and I had every intention of widening it. The conference room was already full when I walked in, but no one spoke. They'd all received the same urgent calendar invite subject line, emergency review, mandatory. Russ stood near the screen eyes, steady on mine. He didn't need a briefing. He knew what was coming. Wade sat at the far end, sipping coffee like he owned the place. He greeted me with that same casual charm, the one he wore like cologne. "Mrs. Gresham," he said with a grin. "Didn't expect you to call this one." "Everything all right?" I returned the smile. "We'll find out shortly." I nodded to Russ. The lights dimmed. The first slide lit up Midwell Group, vendor audit summary. Beneath it, a chart of payments, recurring transfers, with forged authorization codes. I heard chairs creak as people leaned in. Next slide, screenshots of internal expense reports, 5-star hotels, liquor tastings, private transportation services labeled under client development. One had been filed on the weekend of my canceled birthday dinner. Wade cleared his throat. This This feels unnecessary. If you had questions, we could have handled them privately. The third slide appeared, HR complaints flagged, but unprocessed. An intern's formal report alleging persistent intimidation and inappropriate pressure from upper management. The timestamp was from 3 months ago. It had vanished after submission. I looked directly at him. "You're not being promoted, Wade," I said evenly. "You're being prosecuted." His mouth opened, but no sound came. The door creaked open. Merritt stepped in her face, pale. "Mom, I didn't break eye contact with Wade." "Come in, sweetheart. It's time you heard the truth, too." Russ tapped the remote. The screen flipped to Wade's internal list suppliers clients, and then the final tab, personal barriers. Her name, my name, every calculated move laid bare. Merritt looked at the screen, then back at him. "What is this?" Wade stood suddenly too fast. "It's a misunderstanding. A smear. She's twisting everything." "No," I said, my voice steady. "No more secrets." Merritt didn't respond. She just stared at him, silent. But something in her eyes had shifted. She wasn't shielding him anymore. She was seeing him. Wade's voice rose as the walls closed in. "Merritt, don't listen to her. She's orchestrated this entire circus to break us apart." He turned to the board, to anyone who would meet his eyes, desperate now. "She's jealous, controlling. You've all seen it. She couldn't stand that Merritt had her own life." I didn't move. I simply reached into my folder and pulled out one page, an email printed and stamped with metadata he never thought anyone would check. I walked it over to Merritt. She scanned the header, the subject line, then the body. Her lips moved as she read it silently. "Effective." Immediately, I resigned from my position and forfeit any claims to partnership or legacy interest in Stone Pine Defense Logistics. It was signed with her name. Forged. Her fingers trembled as she looked up. You were going to erase me too." Wade's face drained of color. "Merritt, I never." Security entered before he could finish. 2 uniformed men, silent, professional. "Mr. Talcott, we need you to come with us." He didn't fight, just stood there, eyes burning, lips twisted with fury he no longer had the power to hide. "You'll regret this," he hissed as they led him toward the door. "No," I said quietly. I already regretted letting it go on this long. And then he was gone. No outburst, no final plea, just the quiet click of the door as it shut behind him. The room stayed still. I turned to the board. "I built this company," I said, voice calm but firm. "I've signed every check, weathered every storm, and stood in every shadow. But that ends today. I'm reclaiming what was always mine. I didn't look to see who nodded. I didn't need their approval. What I needed was standing next to me, silent, broken, blinking away the last of her illusions." Merritt didn't speak as we walked down the corridor. She didn't reach for me. But she didn't step away either. The damage had been done. But she was still beside me, and that for the first time in years felt like a beginning. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled my kitchen the same way it used to when Merritt was 10, barefoot and flour-dusted, standing on a stool beside me. This time, she stood on her own. No stool, no shadow behind her. She stirred the pot slowly, her sleeves rolled up her eyes, soft with thought. "I signed a lease," she said. "It's not big, but it's mine. My name, my space." I nodded. "Good." She added salt without asking, knew exactly how much to use. Then quietly, "I'm seeing someone, a therapist. Dr. Anton. He specializes in emotional dependency and family trauma." I didn't say anything at first, just passed her the spoon. She took it. We moved around each other in silence, an old dance remembered. "I wasn't ready to hear it," she said after a while. All those times you tried to reach me, and I thought you were just clinging. I admitted, but not to keep you, to not lose you. She turned to face me. Her eyes were clearer than I'd seen in years. You were right. About all of it. But I needed to see it myself. I reached for the bread, set it on the cutting board. I wish I didn't have to show you like that. Her voice cracked just slightly. Maybe you did. Maybe if you hadn't, I'd still be in that house. Still believing he was the only voice that mattered. We ate at the table by the window. No TV, no distractions, just two women rebuilding something from a pile of shared dust. She reached across and squeezed my hand. Thank you, she said. And I didn't say you're welcome. I just squeezed back. He had barred me from my daughter's house, but I never needed permission. I built the roof they lived under.